fact that we only have 1 hour, I think we can start. And I say good day, everybody, and very early good morning to the ones who joined us maybe from Latin America. And welcome to this Navigator Talk special edition about the referendum in Chile. My name is Eike-Christian Hornig, and I'm your host today. And I work as a political scientist, as a senior research fellow at the Liechtenstein Institut in Gamprin, Liechtenstein, and I'm also part of the Navigator to Direct Democracy network. Today we will talk about the recent constitutional referendum in Chile, and as you all know, on September 4, the people of Chile rejected a new proposed constitution in a referendum. And this referendum attracted very much global attention as it gave Chile the opportunity to open a new chapter in its history and to overcome the legacies of the dictatorship. But 62% of the voters rejected the proposal, leaving the transformation of the country unfinished so far. But what was the driving force behind this rejection? And what can we learn from this case for future referendums in Chile and beyond that? And to talk about this, I'm delighted to welcome Yanina Welp as our guest today. Yanina Welp is research fellow at the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy. She is also editorial coordinator at Agenda Pública and founder member of Red de Politologas. Between 2008 and 2018, she has been principal researcher at the Center for Democracy Studies and co-director of the Zurich Latin American Center, both at the University of Zurich. She finished her habilitation in 2015 at the University of St. Gallen with the Venia Legendi in Latin American Studies, and she holds 2 bachelor degrees in social communication and political science from the University of Buenos Aires, and a PhD in political science from the Pompeu Fabra University, I spelled it wrong probably, in Spain. Her research interests are democracy and democratization, political institutions, comparative politics, protest and social movements, digital technologies and politics, democratic innovations, and mechanisms of direct democracy. Yanina has published extensively on these topics in academic journals and books, and her last book is The Will of the People, Populism and Citizen Participation in Latin America. It's great to have you, Yanina. Welcome, and thank you for being with us today. We have 1 hour time to discuss about the Chile referendum, and I will start in the first 30 minutes with questions, and then we will open the floor to you, to the audience for your questions, and we can do it in a very open and very dialogue form to talk about the Chile referendum. Okay, let's start. Let me start by I mean, we all heard about the referendum, of course, and we're interested in direct democracy and citizen participation and so on. But maybe as you are an expert on this issue, let me ask you about the background story of the vote. What really happened there? I mean, politics is, sure, it's about written rules, but politics is maybe something that you have to feel, that you have to observe, that you have to know. And so I'd like to know what is your interpretation of the result? And what did you expect the result to be? Did you expect they approve or the people reject? And what do you think led or caused the rejection of the new constitution?
Yeah, hello, Eike and colleagues. Nice to have this opportunity to exchange on what happened and how to understand this surprise to somehow, in other sense not, results of the referendum. I would like to start by a bit of background, because I think there are some misunderstandings when we look at processes from far away, and it plays a role in Chile. And of course, looking closer to the events also is a complex picture. So it's a question of distance, but also complexity. Some things I would like to say is that the outbreak in 2019 was in the international media seen as a complete surprise. Something completely unexpected in a stable democracy, in one of the, where economic growth was present, stability in many sense, the bipartisanism in the country was one of the characteristics. If you look at all the rankings, Chile was on top with Costa Rica and also facing, I have to say, many problems at the moment, and Uruguay, the most stable democratic systems in the Latin American region. However, if we go a bit back, we can see that there were waves of protests since 2009, 2011. So the surprise was probably the dimension of the outbreak more than this idea of thinking that Chile was a completely peaceful country where people was just satisfied. And then also related to that, there were many signals of this crisis of representation. Besides the protest, there were many indicators showing that Chile was ranking on the bottom, for instance, on trust in political parties and parliaments. And this, for my many Chilean scholars, colleagues in political science, was not a surprise at all. They were talking about that. This situation was not sustainable at a long time. So there was an expectation of this kind of outbreak we observed in 2019. But also, I think it's important to consider the other side of the thing. It's not that the political class, let's say, did just nothing. This is also not true. We can observe, for instance, the reforms of 2005 by Lagos. So it is in many ways the Pinochet constitutions, but in many others it's not at all anymore the Pinochet constitution. And maybe if someone here is interested, I think it's important to consider also that if Lagos would have called a referendum in 2005 to ratify the reforms, maybe the legitimacy crisis, which was on the table, would have been not so intense as it was at the end. So this is part of topics we can discuss related to referendums. But then going closer in time, Bachelet did many more reforms in two ways. One, the institutional reforms, for instance, the electoral reform, the binomial, the electoral system was not in place anymore, which was a quite important inheritance of the dictatorship. And then also in terms of contributing to install in public opinion the interest on the constitutional reform. I think this is very important, and we have to consider the citizens' dialogues, for instance, and all these conversations which took place in Chile in 2015, 16, 17, around the constitution. And then to add complexity to this picture, I think it's also important to remember that in 2018, there were presidential elections, and in a country in which, according to the surveys, around 70% of the population wanted the new constitution, the winner was Piñera, who was the only presidential candidate who was against this idea of a new constitution. So I think when we try to understand why the people like or doesn't like something, there is a complex picture in which maybe we have to fix different priorities and also look at how the different institutional design play a role. So now, going closer to what happened between 2019 and September 4th, 2022. Yeah, just maybe again to remember some key facts. The outbreak was in October 2019. Then the government tried to stop it just with repression, sending the military, the armed forces, the police, and it didn't work. And for this, there was a political agreement. I think this is quite important to consider, and especially when we compare with other cases in Latin America and maybe in other places of the world. It didn't happen, for instance, during the Caracazo in Venezuela, this kind of political agreements to open the room for a new constitution. In Chile, there was an agreement between the elite, between the parties, which later were displaced in the electoral arena, at least for a while. We have to see what happens in the future, but they arrived to an agreement and also arrived to an agreement regarding launching the new the process for a new constitution, but also doing it in a way in which the legal side was also resolved, because the Chilean constitution did not allow for a constitutional replacement. So to call for a constitutional convention was necessary to provide a legal framework, and the plebiscite played this role. Through the plebiscite, both sides were resolved, the legitimacy, but also the legal aspect. Through the plebiscite, it opened the room to call for a constitutional convention, which was not included in the current, now, constitution. Then this election, in the entry referendum to call for a constitution, 50% of the population voted, and almost, well, more than 70% approved the idea of a new constitution, and a new constitution full elected to write the new constitution. But several months later, in May, there was a new election to select the conventionals, and it's important to remember that only 41% of the population voted. So it was quite low, this turnout. And it again opens room to observe what happened, because some people said, okay, now once the Constitutional Convention is approved, they don't care much about who will write it, but this somehow something is not working well in this argument, because the most important thing is who and under what basis, with which ideas will write the new constitution. And I think this very low turnout also plays a role in this, I wouldn't say lack of legitimacy, because I think the convention was directly elected, and when the convention started to rule, had a lot of legitimacy, but they lose this legitimacy quite quickly. And of course, everything is complex, but I think there are at least two important reasons to consider. One is the mistakes of the same convention. There were several mistakes. Some of these mistakes because of lack of experience, some of these mistakes because of the way in which politics are working in Chile now. Some groups just with their own agendas and without caring about how to organize a discourse addressed to build a political community for everybody and not only for these groups. I think this is very challenging in general, not only in Chile, but it's a current challenge. Then some individual mistakes, and of course, all this was over-magnified by the media. And this is also important. But again, it's not single reason, because Boric was not the favorite candidate of these big media, and he succeeded in the election. So we have to carefully consider what happened during all this process. Then finally, as we all know, in September the 4th, 61% voted against this new constitution, and the turnout with mandatory voting, first time, and we will see what happened in the future, 85%, very high. So double of the people who voted for the conventionals now voted for approving or rejecting this constitution. And again, to discuss about referendums, I know that, or I assume that you will ask more about that. I think it's important to have into account that we should discuss more about institutional designs of these referendums, because in this vote, we know who was in favor of this constitution and who was against this constitution. But there were options in the middle. I mean, if you are against this constitution, does it mean that you are against the constitutional replacement? The surveys we have available now after the rejection of the constitution show that, again, 70% or more of the population wants a new constitution, but not this one. And I think a better framing of the referendum would have helped a better design of what is coming now, because some of the parties who, more on the right, who were saying people want a new constitution, but not this constitution, now with these amazing results, well, with this surprising, I mean, so many people against this constitution are saying, well, now people doesn't want a constitution. And we don't know, I mean, in numbers, in a fair process, I'm quite sure that people want a new constitution and trust in the parties and the leaders which were saying, we don't want this constitution, we can go for something better. but we don't know it through the referendum. So I think this is an interesting outcome for we as people working with direct democracy and trying to offer solutions for better designs. So to close this first round, I would say that that to understand what happened, we should avoid really thinking that people was just, I don't know, manipulated by the media. I think it's much more complex than that. I also think it's important to consider that even if there is a bias in the media, was also a bias in the convention, in the media towards the right and in the convention towards the left. Chile is a plural system with freedom of expression, with some weaknesses, but we can't think that or just attribute manipulation to the final result. This could be unfair. And also, I think maybe one more last thing regarding the Constitution. There is an argument I'm listening once and again that the Constitution is bad. And I really doubt about so many people in Chile and outside reading the full constitution to arrive to the conclusion that it's bad. I think the mediators play a very important role, as usual, as in any other place. And I could refer to the Spanish constitution where there are information about that. In the 78, the constitution was approved with a very high legitimacy. And in the years after this approval, there were some surveys by the CIS, the Center of Statistics in Spain, the CIS, showing that when the people was asked, do you like the constitution? Yes. Do you think it's legitimate? Yes. Have you read the constitution? Do you know what is in the constitution? Many people said, no, I didn't know. And I don't know. And I think it's similar in this case. There was a huge debate in Chile, but probably this debate arrived to the people who is more interested in politics, more close to academia, more close to, I doubt really about the background of the vote for the masses, let's say. And I think this is not really a problem because we have mediators always, and these mediations is what we have to look at, the quality of the mediation, more than be afraid of the existence of these mediators.
Okay, thank you. You touched so many aspects. I wrote down all the things at the same time, but let me ask, maybe, because that I found a very interesting point. You referred to the referendum, to the constitutional changes which happened before without a referendum, like 2005 referendum, and said that the constitution, like the old one, is not really the traditional Pinochet constitution, but it changed over time also, from time to time. You said that if, or maybe I understood it this way, but is it true that you think that if there was a referendum already in 2005, there would be a higher legitimacy for that old constitution, on the now valid constitution? And is that a plea for a mandatory constitutional referendum all the time? Do you think that would solve a problem if you have constitutional referendums with every constitutional change?
Yeah, yeah. Your two questions are very good ones. I think, I'm convinced, and I think it's related to the public debate in Chile, the constitution in Chile has a problem. And it's not only a problem of legitimacy, it's a problem of the majorities required to make politics work. These high majorities with the binomial system first, and then later with the legacy still, did not allow politics to really play a role. If people wanted more live out of this subsidiary state, was not possible because of the constitution. So there is a material problem with the constitution, and this problem is still there. And this is the core, I think, of the claim for a new constitution. Although there is also a debate, and I add, it's not related to your question, but I add an interesting point on the discussion now in Chile. It moved to a more, we said in Spanish, garantista constitution. So the first one did not guarantee rights at all, and there is a discussion on this proposal guaranteeing too much and maybe leaving politics now to the tribunals in place. So there is this discussion. But in any case, there is a problem with the current constitution, and the problem is still there. Regarding the legitimacy, I think if in 2005 would have been a referendum, it doesn't resolve the material problem because the constitution still has this problem, but at least would have helped to understand that, that all these agreements were not basically and purely elite agreements, as is the perception in Chile. So I don't know, probably it's not just a magic resolution of the problem, but would have helped. For sure, would have helped. And then regarding the second point, I'm a defensor of the mandatory referendum to ratify constitutional changes in Chile and everywhere. I think it's a very good idea in Switzerland. I think it's a very good idea in Uruguay. It really helps politicians or the authorities to keep an eye on what people perceive and feels and demands, because if they want to pass a reform, they need this reform to be legitimated by the people in a vote. So I definitively go for the mandatory referendums to ratify constitutional reforms, and also for the popular initiative to start constitutional changes.
Okay, but at the you also pointed to the compulsory voting. And pointed out the high numbers, of course, now in this turn. On the other hand, if you say that that people are in favor or against a new constitution, or that they support this and that, but haven't read the constitution or haven't read the proposals, is there still a legitimacy problem if you have compulsory voting and know at the same time that you have many people who don't, I say it in mean terms, don't really know what they are voting about? Is that a contradiction?
Yes and no. I think there is not perfect magic solution. When we select a representative, we also don't know everything. And even it's a kind of they will do after. No, it's no way to say like you can only vote if you are fully informed. My argument regarding the knowledge is that you trust in your intermediaries, and we are in a representative system. And I feel that there is no replacement in the societies in which we live for this representative system. There are complements, but not replacements. So you trust in your leaders. I mean, I'm in favor of vaccination, and I really have not a clue, you know, like if I have to go to medical terms to explain to the anti-vaccination why I'm in favor and I have reason. I trust in the people who, of course, it's not exactly the same because there is an expertise, and in politics, if we talk about democracy, we all should be allowed. And I think mandatory voting is good for that because it forces the representatives to explain more and better. And I think what we need is more instances of dialogue. There are no linear results, you know, because in the case of Chile, I feel that in the media, in the international media, at least in a good proportion, in the progressive media and the academia around the world, a positive perception of this change in Chile, like happened with Iceland before. So now it's a kind of surprise and looking for a linear explanation. And it's more complex because we have to divide, first of all, the process from the results. So was this election fair? Yes, was fair. Do I like the result? No, I don't like it. But was fair. It's not undemocratic because it failed. Although it opens also room to think what will happen with Chile in terms of quality of democracy in the future. I think we can't answer this question now, but probably in the near future we will have more arguments to defend that will be an increase in democratization or a decrease. But we need to see what happens now. If the replacement still is in the agenda and it opens rooms for a new attempt or not.
I really like that you point out that the role of the intermediaries in direct democracy, because I mean we see in the literature, of course, all the time that, for example, party voting recommendation play an important role for voters, and they take them for their own decision, and from my point of view often follow these party recommendations. We shouldn't talk maybe about this as a good or bad thing, but rather take it as a reality, and observe that. And I think the word trust is very good in this case, because it has a positive framing, at least. Says that we can, maybe they trust them. On the other hand, people who support more direct democracy always say, okay, every instance of a vote or every referendum also helps to elevate political knowledge of people, and also it's important for referendums to have a good public deliberation on the issues. And what is your observation of this case now in Chile? Do you think that there was like a space for a fruitful or a good and deep political deliberation about the new referendum?
I'm not sure I can provide like a more complete picture of that. I think we really need more information, and the information is coming. But let's start with what we know, or also point maybe what we need to know. We need to know if these 41% who elected the conventionals voted massively in favor or not. This is something important, I think. We need to know also if the people who voted against, for what exactly it was. I think there was many sectorial discussions to be against or in favor. And there are 2 or 3 topics which were attracting the attention overwhelmingly. One was the indigenous self-regulations, the plurinationality. This was one of the very hot topics. And probably the Constitution has some weaknesses on this point. And quite likely, the contextual situation also helped to prompt even more to reinforce these weaknesses and increase the uncertainty. In the south of Chile, there is a conflict, particularly with some Mapuches groups, and there is violence. And these perceptions were again like amplified and connected to the constitutional debate. So there are, I'm quite sure, some fake news on the table, or we know. What we don't know is the amount of, or the incidence, you know, the level of incidence of these fake news. The same happened with the parity and some gender issues. We know that there were campaigns, dirty campaigns and fake news, but we still don't know the level of incidence of that. What we do know is that the vote against was massive, was not only in the south or in the north, or it was in the whole country. So I think we need more information, and for sure, we need to have also a conversation on how to host such constitutional debates given the complexity. This is something probably present for Chile and for other countries too. I still feel that the referendum, like on one shot, because I heard some scholars suggesting, for instance, to vote article by article. I think this is impossible. It's a kind of nonsense. It's too difficult. And also it could open room to have a completely incoherent constitution. We have to look also at the coherence of the constitution. So I think the idea of voting in one shot is to legitimate the process. I said that before, what I think it can be also offer other options. I mean, if you vote against its constitution, it's because you want a new constitution, but not this, or it's because you don't want a new constitution at all. Maybe there are other options according to the context, because of course, we shouldn't just go for a magic solution for all the countries in the world. If there is an awareness that the problem is the chapter on plurinationality, maybe you can take out 1 or 2 chapters, I mean, for the referendum, you know, and you approve the whole constitution, or you approve the whole constitution excepting this and this chapter, which you think allow for more debate, there are some options which in a given country could be discussed before the calling of the referendum.
But this is an interesting point you mentioned, because you say that, okay, you think that people want a new constitution, and you read that maybe out of the result, but not this constitution. Isn't this exactly one of the weaknesses of direct democracy? Wouldn't that be an argument against holding constitutional referendums? Because it's so complex, and you just have a no and yes answer. And how to interpret this is maybe there are other ways to better solve this constitutional problems.
Look, I think, again, there are two sides in this question, very, very interesting. One is that we have really very, very few constitutional replacement in democratic settings. If you look at, normally we have new constitutions in transitions to democracy coming from the dictatorship, the colonial process, civil wars, external invasions. It's not frequent to have new constitutions in democratic systems. Negrete has his redrafting constitutions where he covered in more than one century. There are very few cases. Switzerland is one of these few. In Europe, we have very few. So we are not talking about the main issue for referendums. I think there is a concern on that, but it's not the most frequent theme. So then what we have is these constitutional reforms, and it's one topic, right? One topic or two. When we call for a mandatory referendum each time the constitution is amended, we are not talking about many different issues normally. Even if we think in several articles, it's like something achievable to have a discussion on the several articles. So that's the dimension of the problem. And then regarding the replacement, yeah, I don't know. I don't think the problem for the new constitution in Chile is the referendum, because probably, I'm sure, this constitution arriving to the parliament would have also been defeated. And you need a kind of second instance. So if we think in systemic terms, the result is similar. It happened in Iceland. The constitution was defeated by the parliament, was approved in referendum and then rejected by the parliament. So I guess it's not an argument really against the referendum. And again, if it's rejected because lacks legitimacy, it's good to know.
Okay, I understand you as your position is rather have more smaller referendums than just one big one, and maybe risking a good proposal to fail. Maybe this is.
Well, but in a total replacement like in Chile, I don't think it's a good idea to call for single referendums. I think these are exceptional cases. And in these exceptional cases, I think it's important to have a referendum, despite we can be aware that it's problematic to somehow. This is my view.
But the question remains how to deal with complexity, of course. Yeah, and you mentioned the degree of fake news maybe that is around, and of course, a new constitution with, I think, 380 different paragraphs, of course, is a complex thing, but you also pointed to the role of the intermediary organizations, and I think this is something that is very important. Let me ask you, or turn this around maybe, when we point to the intermediary institutions or the actors from the representative arena, and they are always important in these referendums, and there's also been reports pointing to the role of the president. And as you, of course, know, there's always the question, has there been like a second order voting in the referendum? What is your observation on this? Was the constitutional referendum also connected to the role of the president?
I think it's clearly connected to the role of the president. I think there were two discussions on that, but clearly the government has changed the cabinet after the results. So as an answer to this referendum, so it's a connection. Clearly it's a connection. Also the government, is a new coalition in government, something really novel for Chilean politics, and it arrived with the promise of a new constitution. So it would be, I don't know, I think there are many signals of this connection. I think there is more in the request for a new constitution, which goes beyond the government, but the connection of this government with the attempt of promoting a new constitution is quite clear. Also, to add to the question, to the topic rather, because it was not part of the question, I think the reaction of the president and the government was quite good, recognizing the democratic, that was a well-organized referendum, the role of CERVEL, the electoral body, etc. But clearly is a connection, and some effect probably also had the losing of popularity of the government, which has been quite intensive in the previous months.
So the referendum also served, even though the proposal was rejected. I understand you that the referendum also served as an instrument to come to more responsiveness from the president or from the representative actors, right? They understood.
This is the feeling, yeah, that they arrived to the conclusion that they are not as powerful as to avoid taking into account other voices which expressed through the referendum, and gave good signals of doing that.
Okay. Looking at the time, I like, of course, I'd like to ask you the last question from my side, maybe. And I know looking into the future is always difficult, but what do you think? What will happen next after this referendum? Will we see a new constitutional referendum in about 2 years or 3 years? What will happen? What is your guess?
Yeah, my guess is that we will know soon if there is a political agreement to conduct a replacement. I think this is now in debate, and we will know soon if this happens or not. I'm not sure if will happen or not, but I think I'm quite convinced that if there is not an agreement to conduct a constitutional replacement, the legitimacy crisis will emerge again with quite powerful. So yeah, I would say that.
Okay, thank you very much to this point. And now I would like to open the floor to our small but very fine group of listeners. And I will give you the chance to ask your questions to Yanina Welp if you want. Just feel free. I see one question. Okay, please.
Hello, thank you very much for organizing this. I'm just going to introduce myself. Cristian Fernandez. I'm at the University of Bern, and I'm a Chilean expat. So I work here now in Switzerland, and that's probably the reason that I'm connected here. As a Chilean expat, one of the things that shocked me the most was the difference how Chileans abroad voted. Like they approved the new draft, but Chileans in the country rejected it. So I would like to ask Yanina what her view is on this difference.
Yeah, Christian, nice to meet you, and I hope to see you in Switzerland in one of our Latin American events soon. It's a very good question. And again, we need more data. My speculation refers to the profile of the expats, Chileans abroad voting. I haven't checked the data to see exactly how many, because for Chileans abroad was not mandatory, the voting. So I haven't compared with the entry referendum to observe if participation went down or not. This I don't know, and I think we should look at that to approach also an answer. But my feeling is that could be that the profile of the voters abroad narrowed a bit in relation to the entry referendum, and voted the profile of people a bit more progressive, let's say, than particular profiles like you, let's say, a scholar doing a postdoc in Switzerland. This is part of the answer, and probably the other part is related to daily life, to how people perceive some, for instance, the events of violence in the South. against the mediatic machine, let's say. Some people could have perceived the country dangerous and thought that, yeah, it's better to wait and do something a bit more, I don't know, under control, which I think is more like a media framing than a fact, because my reading of the Constitution is that it's not like a radical Constitution, although, as I said before, it opens room to discuss if it's not going too far into a Constitución garantista, which at the end of the day puts in the course the resolution of the problems which should be resolved by doing politics, let's say.
Okay, the next question comes from my colleague from Liechtenstein, Stefan Scheutzke. Stefan, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Little time, many questions. I would say that I would agree with almost all you said, but there are left some questions. I will limit myself to two, given the time. There would be others, but you stressed all the time the question of the framing of the referendum. You said that the better framing would have been needed, and that you stressed, as Eike also pointed out, to the role of the moderators. At the same time, you said, and that is of course true in absolute terms, that it was not about a question of manipulation of the media. Of course, it's difficult to quantify somehow the role these media campaign played, but how do you bring these things together? That you have a very concrete situation of the media in Chile, historically grown with a set of different actors, and then the need to have an even better framing of the referendum in terms also of moderators. So who would these moderators exactly be, and what would the media be by which these moderators could do their job of a better framing of the referendum? And the second question is also like a kind of tension I perceived from what you told us. You said that, if I understood correctly, that if there would have been a referendum in 2005, this would have been created legitimation or legitimacy for the whole process of constitutional change over a longer term. I would agree with that, but you then explicitly said that it would have helped in the sense that it would have shown to the people that constitution and constitutional changes are not the product of elite negotiations. What, as far as I perceive it, what we have as a problem now is that the constitutionals didn't represent, actually, given also the percentage of voters, didn't actually represent the whole society of Chile in political terms. And what is, as far as I perceived from a distance, what is seen as a solution is that further development of propositions of constitutional change should be delegated now again more to political actors in terms of political actors in the sense of political party actors. So back actually to the political elite. I see there a certain tension with regard to what you said before.
Yes, thank you, Stefan, for your comments and the opportunity to clarify some aspects. When I talk about the framing of the referendums, I refer more than to the media, which also is a topic in the conversation, to the design of the paper ballot. I think it's important to move to multi-optional referendums. Do you agree with the constitution? Yes or no? Do you agree with the constitution replacement? Yes or no? I don't know. Switzerland has some experiences on that. In Germany is in discussion for subnational levels how to design better the ballot paper. And I think this is important because knowing the debate is possible to frame it in order to provide a better mandate for now, you know, because now, yeah, because I read the Ipsos survey, I think that more than 70% of the population still wants a new constitution. But if we have in the ballot paper all this, it establishes a mandate for the authorities for the future. So I think in general, in referendums, we have to move to multi-optional designs of the paper ballot in order to provide clear mandates. When you are against something, it's because it's too radical or because it's too little. Which is your preference? And I think this could have been, and in general, not only in the Chilean case, I think we have to move to multi-optional referendums in the paper ballot, also to go beyond the typical criticism of referendums as binarios and polarizantes, no, polarizing and binary mechanism. Then, regarding the participation of different actors, this is also a typical problem with referendums and even probably increasing also with normal or standard electoral processes. We need better regulation of the campaigns because in referendums, there isn't normally a good regulation of campaigns. And probably this is lacking in Chile also, like how to go against fake news, no? How to go against some ideas which more from, I think this deserves a discussion. And then your final point, which I find super interesting, because it's not my point that the decision has to go back to the elite. It's more my point that we should, when you have intermediaries, not necessarily are a narrow elite or not necessarily can be identified with an elite. So I think also civil society organizations play a role as intermediaries. So it's not going back to the elite, but recognizing the power of all these mediators, which play a very important role normally in shaping public opinion, because we all shape our opinions with our peers around, wherever your peers are, in the fabric or in the university or in the party or in the church even. So it's this recognition more than, so now I don't think the convention lacks legitimacy. I insist on that. I think was legitimated under the electoral system playing at this moment. And now the challenge is this movement between voluntary voting and compulsory voting, which I don't know what will happen in the future. So this is part of a challenge, I would say, more than other thing. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Okay, Stefan, you said you have a few questions. Maybe we have time for one more if you want. And
yeah, I just responding a little bit or reacting to what you said with this perspective or idea to go to more differentiated questions at the ballot and to have many options or more options than yes or no. And you also said before that, and that's perfectly true, I think, and you know it, of course, much more better than I do, but what has been perceived that there have been many sectorial discussions about specific problems, and when these things summed up, it came out as it came. Nevertheless, I asked myself when I was listening to you, for example, there was a notorious problem of the Mapuche, and at the same time, one thing is that indigenous self-determination is a trend in whole South America or even Latin America. So there has to be somehow explained why it didn't turn out in Chile as it did in other countries. But maybe I didn't read the constitution, neither, I have to admit. So maybe it's really a question of details. However, I asked myself if I would have these normal Chilean people affected by what the constitution would bring as changes, why I should reject a constitution that would bring me so many advantages, starting with basic resources as water supply, when I then should reject a constitution with regard to a question of national identity in the far south of the country, that a certain group of population would have some more privilege, that, and it's a group that has underprivileged, of course, for so many time. But even if I think on a maybe on a rational level, why should I reject a constitution that brings in my everyday life so many advantages to the situation I have now, education, development, and so on and so forth, for such few things that appear to me as problematic? That's the deal I have to deal with every ballot round here in Switzerland, voting for or against a new law. So I have to make the balance and check out, does it bring more or less for me if I vote yes or no? And I suppose it's the same in Chile. So I think it's difficult, even then, if you say, well, there were sectorial discussions, it doesn't explain, I would say, the whole turnout then, or the whole result at the end. Yeah, because of what
I fully agree with your comments, and I can't answer the question, but I could add that the people in prison was allowed to vote for first time, and their political rights were included in the constitution also as a total novelty, and they voted massively against. The constitution was also rejected in prisons, where you have the profile of people who first did not have political rights before this constitution, without this constitution won't have political rights, and in general comes from the sectors which are most benefit by all the changes established in the constitutional proposal in terms of health, education, social protection, etc. So this is something, as I said from the very beginning, we need more information, and probably in prisons the sample is there. It's not so difficult to do research, and our colleagues in Chile which are absolutely active collecting information and doing all type of research, will know soon, I hope, because we really need to know why the people who was expected to take more advantage of these changes massively voted against. For sure, there are more explanations.
Okay, that's I think that points to the importance of more research and the question what drives people is not only like a material answer, but even or the political answer maybe, and the framing that you said, Yanina. What's the framing in a campaign of the referendum? I think that is a very important point. Okay, I think we've come to the end of this Navigator Talk special edition. Thank you so much. That was very instructive and very interesting to hear about the case of Chile, and also I think in a comparative view, very interesting because you mentioned some very clear points also regarding the institutional design. The last point with the multi-optional referendum, I think it's very interesting to think about and to maybe to help direct democracy to come out of this yes and no corner and give it more options, and to really help to read results more clearly and to interpret what really the people want. And this multi-option thing is very important in this view, and also compulsory voting I think is an issue that you are very interested in and active about, and that we need to talk about. And when we think about the state of democracy as such, maybe that's a very interesting point. How do people vote, or why do people vote and why not, and what we can do about it. So I think for our view on the institutional design also of direct democracy, we have mentioned some very interesting points. with this case of the Chile referendum. Okay, thank you so much, Yanina, for sharing your insights with us and for your time. And thank you now our two listeners, Stefan and Mr. Palomo and Bern. Yeah, see you next time, maybe at the Global Forum and or at the Navigator talk or somewhere discussing direct democracy. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
everybody, and goodbye.
Bye.